Hello, students. Welcome back to our weekly session. This will be our last session of the whole semester. This is corporate governance part 2. So guys, how to corporate governance? I already did a full session on what is corporate governance. I think you already got it, but let's take some action into this matter. Get our hands a little bit dirty. So there are two main components of corporate governance. So first is how to establish a hierarchy. How will you establish all the organization towards a corporate governance? So what are the positions that you would need to cover to have corporate governance? What are the activities, the responsibilities of that structure? And there is a second step, which are internal controls, both very important, and we would get into both of them. So we will start with corporate governance. So what are the board functions and responsibilities? A board of directors is a formal construct for every company that essentially provides governance for the company. A board has a number of different functions and responsibilities. Think about them breaking into formal and informal. The formal responsibilities include things such as hiring and firing the CEO, representing shareholders, representing the different investors in the company, and representing the founders of the company. You have a responsibility, which is duty of care, to do things in a way that it's in the best interest of the company and responsible for the company, and a duty of loyalty to create situations that are not to create conflicts of interest. A conflict of interest, guys, just for your knowledge, is what if you have, there are a lot of situations. It's very broad of perspective, but I can show you. I think you will get me with one simple example. What would you think if you have a CFO that contracts her wife as an accountant, and that's an internal conflict of interest, because there can be a lot of situations that put into risks that certain area of the company. Why? Because imagine that what if her wife enters with a very large salary compared to the median market salary for that position? That could be a potential risk, no? Because it's her wife. So that's a conflict of interest, an internal conflict of interest. And an external conflict of interest could be that the person in charge of purchasing things in the company has a relative that I don't know what, it runs a travel organization, and he needs to purchase travels, and rather than having different quotations to travel and purchase the cheapest travel for the company on benefits, it would bring benefits by selecting the cheapest way to travel for the company. What if he just, instead of quoting the cheapest travel, he just buys directly to his family or related party company, travel company? I think you get it, right? So the duty of loyalty is that the board members agree not to create conflicts of interest. And obviously we have a duty of confidentiality because your board should keep all information confidential to the company. So the informal responsibilities of the board are often the ones that have the most impact. As an investor, my responsibility is to do anything that CEO needs to be successful. So whatever he or she wants as help from me as a board member, that's my job. When you think about the functional responsibilities around the company and the division of labor between the CEO and the board, it's very easy to define the boundaries. So the CEO runs the company, period. The decision that the board needs to make is whether or not that board support the CEO. If the board supports the CEO, it should be easy for the board to let the CEO run the company. Now, a great CEO runs the company very transparent. It's very transparent with the board about what he or she is doing and running the company. So it is important that it's a two-way street. It's not okay that the CEO run the company and the board will just close their eyes and ignore what's going on. It's you, CEO, have the responsibility and authority to run the company, but communicate to the board on what's going on. What are the hard decisions that you have, that the CEO has to make? Make sure that the expertise it's being used from the board, and make sure that they will never get a surprise regarding the context of the company. So what are the board committees? There are very specific things that the board should take responsibility for doing. For example, for compensation, as you're watching in the slide, for the CEO. This compensation is both based on bonus and equity. Remember in the last session, we talked about agency risk and that we could mitigate it with the balance scorecard. Another way to mitigate the agency risk is to give variable compensation like equity. It's very common that C-level executives have equity upon their salaries, because by giving them and providing equity will give them incentives to perform well, because what you want to increase as part of your value, meaning personally, if I would run the company or I'm the CEO, if I have stocks from that company, I would tend to make the value of that company increase, because at the end I have stocks from that, and if the company's values more, has more value, I would have a very better proprietary value. Okay. So most boards end up having compensation committees that the CEO and the head of HR or the CFO or the reporting team, in the context of proposing different compensation agreements that the committee then has to approve. Another primary responsibility from the board is auditing the performance of the business. Often you will have a formal audit committee of the board. That this audit committee requirement of investors is especially important as a control mechanism and a governance mechanism in the context of the company. The audit company pays attention to what is going on from the financial perspective and provides advice back to the CEO and the leadership team about what needs to happen. When should I form a board? I think early stage companies can benefit from creating boards early. And the reason for this is that it establishes a level of formality around the running and execution of the business. And now the level of accountability that they have to the board in a formal way is pretty lightweight. Again, at those early stages, it's mostly informal, but it does force them to interact with the board on a regular basis. It does cause entrepreneurs to learn how to build the muscles of having board meetings or having to talk about where they are going with the business on, quarterly, annual, multi-year time or horizon, with an objective set of board members that in a lot of cases are good practice for what it's going to look like when you scale up your company and have venture investors on a much more sort of serious heavyweight board. The other reason to have a board early on is that engaged board members can help you tremendously with the growth of your business. If you think about one of your roles as an entrepreneur, it's to collect people. You want to collect great people to the business, great employees, great investors, great customers, great advisors, great board members. And you can use the board as a tool to engage some people in your business in a much more substantive way that helps you build your business and grow and expand your business. So don't lose sight on the value, especially early on, of what a board member can do to help accelerate your business based on their own experience and their own connections. So what's the difference between an advisory board and a board of directors? The board of directors is a formal construct, okay? It has a formal responsibility, and the advisory board is an informal construct that tends not to have any formal responsibilities. A lot of entrepreneurs create advisory boards for their companies for two reasons. One is to try to show that they are, capable of interesting famous people associated with the companies. And then the second is that a lot of entrepreneurs don't want the formal relationship with the board, especially early in the life of the company. My general feeling about advisory boards is that they tend to be pretty weak. There are cases where entrepreneurs do a very good job of managing an advisory board, but in those cases, they have to be very proactive about managing the advisory board and getting the advisors actively engaging with the company. And I encouraged in those cases that to consider which of the advisory board members would make a good board members, and then formalize that relationship by having them be board members, because then they'll take a lot of more responsibility and engage both informally and formally. Private company boards tend to range in size from very small to, in some cases, very large. The typical size of a private company board is somewhere between three and 7 board members. There's a lot of methodologies around having an odd number so that you never get deadlocked on votes. It turns out that because, especially with investors, the notion of how the votes actually work and who has what rights, that the odd or even number of board members tend to matter very infrequently. When you have 3 board members, you often have a founder, an investor, and an outside board member, or 2 founders and an investor, or 2 founders and an outside board member. You always want to have at least 1 outside board member. That's very powerful thing because you need an independent board member that doesn't have either an ownership stake through a major investment in the company or an ownership stake through being a founder in the company. That allows you to deal with lots of situations where you need an independent vote, where you want somebody who's not directly involved in the economic outcome. This doesn't mean that they can have any economics in it, but that their economics are minor and it's very easy for them to be viewed as an independent director. What you often see is boards, especially as they raise more money, they become very investor heavy. So you will start off with a nice balance board between investors and entrepreneurs, and all of a sudden you wake up one day and you've got 7 board members, you know, the CEO, an outside board member, and 4 or 5 investors. So those are not particularly good boards in terms of balance, because they would shift the way too much towards the investors versus acting like a true board that's helping the CEO and helping the leadership the team. As an entrepreneurship or a founder, you would really want to try to maintain balance between the entrepreneurs and the investors. The best way to maintain that balance is to think about it as having a founder board member or a management board member for each investor board member, and then filling in the rest of the board with outside board members. It doesn't have to be exactly equal, but you don't want to be in a situation where there's plenty of imbalance around the table. Okay. And just to move on to the presentation before we get into that, how would you compensate the board members if you want to establish a corporate governance model in your companies, guys? We have to remember that entrepreneurs, some of the time, one of the main issues that they have is cash. So a private company board member compensation should be very straightforward. First of all, you should never pay a private company board member on cash. As a startup company that's growing, cash is extremely valuable to you. What you should be willing to do is pay that board member in equity. Similar type of equity grant that you would give to a senior executive. The best way to describe it is, think of what you would give a VP level person and divide that by 2. That's roughly the amount that you would tend to give to an outside director. In addition, you would be willing to cover their expenses for going to a board meeting or doing any sort of board business. And this is for outside the directors. For VC directors, you should simply be willing to pay their expenses for coming to the board meetings, but they shouldn't get any additional equity for sitting on the board. The best way to enforce your board term is to create vesting of the stock that you're giving to the board member over that period of time. A very typical way is to have a 4-year board term, and let's say you're granting to that board member 0.5 or 1% of equity based over a 4-year period. By having a 2 or 4-year vest on the stock, that gives you an endpoint at which to have the conversation with the board member. I'd like you to stay on the board for another 2 years. I'd like you to stay on the board for another 4 years. Here's another grant. Or the 4 years is up and, you know, I'd like to replace you with somebody else at this point. So now let's go let's get back into the presentation. So you're watching a corporate governance model, a corporate modern governance model structure or hierarchy chart. Okay, guys. So you might see at the very far top, you have the shareholders, and then you will have board of directors. This is what usually in startups it begins as an advisory board. Okay, once you establish a formal relation and you will give them formal duties, that advisory board could transform into a board of directors. In that board of directors, this is a very typical hierarchy chart. You will have the remuneration committee. Remember that you have a committee to know how to remunerate or give the salary of the CEO, the incentives for the CEO. You will have a committee for that. You will have a nomination committee to select executive management. You will have an R&D committee, which is those are the ones that will prioritize what it's gonna be the research and development component of the company. You will have the audit committee. Remember, the ones that reviews the financial situation and advise shareholders and executive management team. And there's another one of the chairmanship. Okay, this is the most typical board of directors for corporate governance models, and you will have always compliance, insurance, audits. Maybe you have the audit committee for internal controls, and the compliance and insurance is part of an external audit. There are a lot of models, guys, but this is a very nice structure. So, and below the board of directors, you will see the executive management, which is the guys that run the company. You will have the C-suite structure in there. Okay. And below, it's the whole organization. That's how you would establish corporate governance. So at the beginning of a startup, or if you don't have this type of structures in your companies, or early companies, you would tend to start with an advisory board, and you will establish formal responsibilities like audit committees, R&D committees, nomination committees, that will help you to go all the way that we just talked about. So this is basically what is the corporate governance. How do you establish from a corporate governance structure, which is the first component of corporate governance, remember? Now we will get into the second component of the corporate governance, which is internal control. Internal controls are the mechanism that rules and procedures implemented by a company to ensure the integrity of financial and accounting information, promote accountability, and prevent fraud. Remember that the whole main goal of establishing corporate governance is to decrease the risk of failing with the company. It's not a matter of the CEO just running out the company without any help, with maybe some bias, decision bias, that whenever he runs and takes a decision, you may plunge the stock value of your company and you end up in a bankruptcy procedure. That's the main goal. So internal controls are also mechanisms to prevent any fraudulent activity and to ensure the integrity of the financial information that you are giving to everybody. Because remember that the financial information is the ones that everybody is getting in order to take decisions in their company. So we have some guidelines, guys. This is very common and typical that you as students engage with this. The first case or the case that make a dramatic change towards internal controls around the world, it was the Enron case. Please search it, take a look at it. The Enron case, basically it was a huge petroleum or energy company that did some fraudulent fraudulent procedures, and they provided fraudulent information to their shareholders and their owners that end up with a bankruptcy procedure of one of the biggest energy companies in the world. But imagine that there were a lot of employees which invested in their stocks, and I imagine that companies that have a very that they have a lot of staff that has 30-40 years working with them and that they are already retiring. If you end up bankruptcy, what would happen with their pensions? So it was a huge case, guys. There's a lot of information outside that, and the one of the conclusions or what of the consequences of that case, and there are many others. It's very often those kind of things, but one of the consequences, it was the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. So it's enacted in the wake of the accounting scandals in the early 20s, and it seeks to protect investors from fraudulent accounting activities and improve the accuracy and reliability of corporate disclosures. So I will give you an example. I will show you right now. This is Apple annual report. And in the annual reports, guys, from public companies based in US, you will have the report of independent registered public accounting firms, which are the auditors of the company. Remember, from the corporate governance structure, we have auditors those auditors, what they have to give is their opinion. They give their opinion on the financial statements, that they are presented fairly. What it means to be presented fairly is that they are not 100% sure, they are not 100% sure that everything is super correct, no? Like they gave the information until the cent. What they are achieving is that the in the figures that they are presenting, there is no relevant mistakes. Okay, they are not material, they don't have something called material errors. What is a material error is that maybe if there's a 1 peso mistake or $1 mistake for a $10 worth company, maybe that mistake it's way huge for me if my company is worth $10. But what happens if you have a $1 mistake and that company's value $100? Would you care as an investor to lose $1 of in mistakes or errors? Would that be relevant to you? I leave that question to you, but that's basically a little example of what does it means to be to have financial statements to be presented fairly, and that it doesn't have material errors. So these accounting reports, guys, are commonly used for all our public companies. And it's very common that if you will get financed by a debtor, like a bank, they will request to you, and that applies to private companies, not only for public companies. In private companies, if you create your company, if you want to go to the bank to request a loan, it's very common that they will request you an audited financial statement. That means that you went to an external auditor, and that auditor is giving their opinion on your financial statements that are presented fairly. And how do they know? Because they do an audit procedure. They review your financial statements, how you do, and they do some tests to see if you're complying with presenting a proper financial statement. So in case that you are not presenting fairly, you also can have a negative opinions, guys. You will see in here, in our opinion, the financial statements are not presented fairly, and they will give you the reasons why. Okay. So, but the important part in here, what I wanted to show you, is that we also, there's a second paragraph, and this is only in certain public stock exchange markets, because auditors in this type of companies like Apple doesn't only review they do not only review the financial statements. They also review the internal controls of the company, and they give their opinion on their internal controls of that company. We also have audited, in accordance with the standards of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board of the US, Apple's internal controls over financial reporting. And based in our criteria, we have an unqualified opinion. Okay. Basis of their opinion, I just wanted to show you, this is an example of what an external auditor does to the internal controls of a company. So as you're watching, you will have the COSO framework because this is the way to establishing internal controls, guys. This is the framework that everybody uses, or this is the most broadly accepted model for designing and assessing internal control, which was created in 1992, sorry, created by COSO. So you would have different levels, okay, which is the control environment, the risk assessment, the control activities, information and communication, which are the systems, and the monitoring activities, okay? The control environment starts with a proper corporate governance structure. You have your shareholders or your investors, and then you have your board, and then you have your management team, as we already explained. And the control environment starts with if that structure has the willing to do a proper internal control procedure in their companies. If you have a fraudulent CEO, you would have that environment replicated at all levels. It makes sense, no? If the head of the company is the one that is running everything super properly and establishes internal controls and directions to all the team or to all the organization, that's providing a proper control environment through all the hierarchy, through all the organization. That's what means control environment. And once we have a nice control environment, because from the top, we establish that, from the top of the organization, we're establishing that, we will get into how do we establish internal controls in our organization. So these are the main typical steps. These typical steps are also in the internal controls procedures. You will have a lot of guidance regarding internal and audit controls. But these are the typical procedures. The first thing that we have to do is identifying risk. Second thing, identifying control activities. Third, select control to test and analyze the results. This is the way to test internal controls. So I will give you a very quick example because this is the last part, guys. This is how you can start with your companies. The first thing is that remember that the internal controls, the objective is to provide proper financial information. So what you must do is you will have a trial balance, which is the financial information that you are reporting to the investors, right? You report the trial balance in a financial statement way, okay? But the basis of the statements, of the financial statements is the trial balance. So you will request a trial balance to your accountant, and you will go from to each account, like, I want to review cash first thing, no? And once you review caches, you will identify control activities. So there's an example in here. Tenet Limited has the following internal controls over cash receipts. You will type it down in a Word document or an Excel. Excel is better because you can establish a control matrix and identify the control activity that is applicable to each procedure. So all over the country, receipts are recorded on cash registers. Daily cash counts are performed by the accounting supervisor. The duties of receiving cash, recording cash, and maintaining custody of the cash are assigned to different individuals. only cashiers may operate cash registers. All cash is deposited intact in the bank account every day. So guys, what I'm trying to give you is these are the controls that company established. Okay, all over the country, receipts are recorded on cash register. What they are doing is from each risk that they are assessing, like if you're a cashier and you received the money from any company, it's just a cash transaction. It can be in a grocery store, whatever you want to watch. Any person that receives cash is a cashier. Okay, so what if you need a cashier in your company? Okay, what are they trying to do by all over the country? Receipts are recorded on the cash registers. What they are trying to diminish or decrease as risk is that if there's some money that I didn't record, what would happen to the financial information? So we have a risk of misstatement right there, no? So how we decrease that risk? Everything you receive must be recorded. So how would you test that recording? You will review the recording receipts. Okay, we have them. Okay, but that's not that doesn't ensure that you have the total, all the receipts recorded. Okay, how would you decrease that risk of all the risk doesn't record it? You assign an accounting supervisor that will count the cash on a daily basis by the end of the day. How we will assess that all the receipts are recorded is that if you have $1,000 worth in cash, and then you have $1,000 worth of receipts, you are ensuring that the cashier has registered everything accordingly. Okay? And the duties of receiving cash, recording cash, and maintaining custody of the cash are assigned to different individuals. What they are trying to do in here is that imagine that the cashier is the accountant. If he records on the accountancy ledger, what happens if he registers 1,000 less of cash? That 1,000 will match the accounting records. And when I get that money into the bank, it will match because I provided entrance to the accounting records to the cashier that it's receiving that money. Rather than that, what if the accounting supervisor that performed the cash count goes to register those the total money that he counted? If the cashier wants to take some money and then he goes to the bank and deposit that, what would happen between the cash balance deposited and the accounting record? That would be a mismatch, right? So what they are doing is decreasing the segregation of duties risk. Only cashiers may operate cash registers. Imagine that that rather than other person as the cashier receiving money from customers, you can have selling representatives that receive money, but at the end, you must have an established procedure to communicate that that salesperson received money. Okay, you would need a system, and it doesn't have to be a inputted system like a computer system. It can be just a system. It's a formal internal control procedure on maybe you can write off tickets, and from those tickets you will know how much money you have to collect from the cashier. It's a you know that this I think you figure out now by now that this is a huge topic, okay? But what you want to avoid is that another person rather than the cashier, the ones that know how the accounting supervisor will count how he needs to perform that procedure and how he needs to take that money to the bank. So you want to avoid another person receiving money, right? So all cash is deposited intact in the bank on account every day. Well, I think we covered that part. So, and another example, guys, could be account receivable. You remember, you go to the trial balance and you go to account receivable. And what type of risks you will have in account receivable? If you give or provide credit to your customers, well, you have a risk that those customers don't pay you. How would you manage to decrease that risk of those customers not paying you? What if rather than waiting to be to avoid any of receiving those types of customers, what if you perform and prevent an audit procedure? What if you prevent from receiving this type of customers by analyzing those customers previously to make a commitment with them? So I review their financial statements. I request some opinions on how do they work, if they pay well, etc., etc. And you're decreasing that risk, right? If everybody checks it, oh, they are great, we haven't have any issue with the payments. Okay, their financial statements, oh, they are very healthy, they have cash, they have good liquidity, perfect. I might grant them some credit, perfect. Let's formalize that credit with a contract, right? And what happens if you don't pay? You can establish that with a contract, no? Maybe, I don't know if that's something very, very dramatic, because that's not a common or a regular thing when you give credits, unless you are a bank. But what banks do is, if I'm gonna give you a credit and I don't know you, give me a guarantee, give me a house. That can be something that you can establish. But most of supplier customer operations, they only operate with a contract, a formal contract, and then you will have something called an invoice. The invoice gives formality also to the activity. The invoice is like incorporating the government into your transaction, because the invoice has to be approved by the government. So you will have a contract, an invoice, and even with that, with those documents well done, you can go to a bank to request money in advance. and you don't have to wait until the customer to be you don't have to wait from the customer to be paid. Okay, just common general knowledge. So but at the end, how you can mitigate the risk of that guy not paying? If you see first of all, if you are an administrator, you will request something called an aging report that will establish from each customer how they are paying. Do I have pending invoices to be paid in 30 days? First column. Do they have pending invoices to be paid on 60 days, 90 days? And from each customer, you will have a line with they have 30 days credit. So if the first line that has the first customer has 30 days of credit and you see an aging invoice that he hasn't paid from 60 days, you know that something's happening there. So first control is reviewing the aging report, the account receivable aging report. That's a first control. Maybe you want the supervisor to review that control, no? That I want on a monthly basis that the supervisor signs that report as a matter of letting me know that he's reviewing the aging report and that he knows the people that it owes me. First control. Second control, from the guys that are getting behind on payments, make them a first note, a friendly note that, dude, I need to charge, or we don't want to engage in a legal fight. Just pay me because on contract you have these terms. Perfect. The ones that get behind 90 days, you want a second notice, and maybe you get involved your legal department and guys, this is the final warning. If you don't pay, we will get into a demand or you will do a legal procedure. Okay, that's another example, guys. I gave you a cash example, an account receivable example. I think by now you know that this is a whole semester topic, but the important aspect is that now you know how to establish corporate governance from the top level, how to structure your corporate governance for your startup or maybe for your company. If you have a company that doesn't have a corporate governance, now you know that you need to start looking for some advisory, create your advisory board, evolve that advisory board to a board, a formal board, and for sure you will need it if you want to go public. If you want to go public, you at least need 3 years of formal corporate governance, and they will audit or do a due diligence toward those 3 years of corporate governance. So that's it for all, guys. Thank you very much for the whole semester. This was our last session. I hope you liked it. I think the corporate governance is a very nice topic to close our semester, when our learning topics. So have a great semester. I know that you will do very fine with your exams, your final exams and capstone projects. So thank you very much for everything, guys, and see you.